when I started working on LocalBuzz, I came from the standpoint of like not originally just coming up with a solution, but really thinking about what is the nuance of this problem that we're trying to solve, right? And what's going on with the current landscape. And so what I learned is that a lot of the way that the internet is structured is really along the lines of two approaches.
Hey, you're listening to the Friends in Austin podcast. I'm your host, Justin Talent, and every week I bring you the stories of the people of Austin. Thank you for listening. Hey, welcome back to Friends in Austin. Today I have Adrian Gillette on the podcast. He has a startup called LocalBuzz. And Adrian, can you tell us in a nutshell what the startup does? Well, then I want to ask you kind of about how you got it started, how you're marketing it, et cetera. Because we talked a little bit before the podcast.
Yeah.
And I have a startup myself that I didn't tell you about yet. So I want to see if I get any tips from you on getting something off the ground. I'm curious as to the whole journey from the get-go and like how much money you put into it, like all this stuff. So, but let's start with, what it is.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Yeah. So LocalBuzz, the way I think about this is that we're a video-based platform that helps people to discover and connect to local communities. So this is something that we've started off in Phoenix back in December, and now we're operating in Austin. So essentially, we have a mobile app as well as a website that you can go to be able to pull up, basically videos of people that are posting and sharing all the cool things that are happening around in our local communities.
Okay, so how would you, I'm sure the first thing that comes to a lot of people's mind when you say that is kind of like Instagram, only Instagram isn't really about local communities so much it is about the individual's life or what they're doing. So what makes it local? Yeah,
we get that comparisons a lot of time, right? Hey, Instagram is very visual and very, very visual as well. But to your point, Instagram is really started off as something where you're sharing photos with your friends. And now it's, you're sharing videos and photos with the whole world, right? So it doesn't have that local context to it. So the content can be just about anything. And a lot of it are selfies, right? Because the original intent was like, hey, I'm sharing these photos with my friends and family type of thing. Where with LocalBuzz, we have a very specific purpose in terms of creating this rich visual experience really around the context of like, hey, these are things that are happening around in our local communities. So the content that you see there isn't your selfies or anything like that. Everything really has a purpose, and that's really raising awareness about what our communities are about.
Okay, so like the value proposition for me, if I want to use it, is kind of like, hey, I want to be more in tune with what's going on in Austin, kind of like what this podcast is.
Yeah, I
have an appreciation for that because I find local things kind of more interesting because you can interact with them more easily than you can things that are not local and more of an impact on you and your daily life, et cetera. So the user gets that out of it, correct? They get more engagement with their local community. So like, how would I use it myself? Let's say I install it today and I want to go use it. Is it more of a business oriented application or is it more of like a consumer application?
So it's actually for both. We see a really big opportunity where we can actually create a great community experience and allow businesses to be part of that community because they are a big portion of the local communities as well. But it's really the first time where we're building a platform that's really driven by communities and not only for communities. So we want to give people the first person vantage or perspective on what is happening. You'll be able to see what that experience is like, right? And like right now, there isn't anything on the web that does that. Even like, for instance, do 512.
Yeah,
correct?
Do 512,
right?
Yeah.
That's a big player in this space. And so if you go to that site, what you see are a lot of banners and then their descriptors. Like, okay, these are the type of things that are happening around it. So you get a description of it, but the description doesn't fully convey what the experience is like. And it's so much exciting to be able to see those experiences in visual form.
Yeah. Okay. So businesses may use it to kind of show what's going on around their places. People may use it at Zilker Park. They may use it at their local coffee shop, stuff like that.
Correct. Yeah. Again, local businesses are a big portion of what happens in the community, but they're certainly not everything about what happens in community. Like to your point, there's things that are happening in the park. There's like I was just over at Lamar. Is it the lake or river Lamar? Right?
Well, I don't know if there's a Lamar River. There's South and North Lamar that run right through Austin, and they do cross over Town Lake, which is now Lady Bird Lake. But yeah.
Got it. So, there's things there. There's like today when I was out there, there's a street performer. He was just out there jamming, and be able to see those type of things that are happening in the community is truly cool and awesome, in my opinion.
Were you on that pedestrian bridge?
Yeah, I was on that pedestrian bridge.
There's a name for that bridge. People call it the Lamar Bridge, but it's actually called something else.
Yes, it is. And I forget the name.
I don't remember what it's called either. So we'll talk more about the business, but how long have you been? I mean, you live in Phoenix, I assume, since you started the business there?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you just kind of why Austin then? Why come here to as your next city for this business?
Yeah. So Austin, I've been to Austin about 2 years ago, and I came here for a high school reunion, and we absolutely had such an amazing time with the nightlife, of course. But when we were in Austin, we were staying on the east side of Austin, and so we were kind of like exploring that area, and it had such a neighborhood community type of feel to it. And I was like, wow, this town really embodies community. And I also was like, man, it would be so great to show not only the U.S. but the rest of the world, what community is like, and have Austin be kind of the model for that. And so when we were thinking like, hey, because I'm based in Phoenix, we're going to launch in Phoenix first, but what would be the next great city to bring LocalBuzz to, where we could really show the rest of the world, this is what Austin's about.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So have you always lived in Phoenix?
No, I was born and raised in Singapore, of all places.
Okay.
But the reason why I have an American accent, where here people are like, hey, you don't have you just have a neutral accent, right? Is because I went to an American school over there. So my mom had remarried a guy from Montana. So I'd split my time between Singapore and Montana. So going to school in Singapore, but spending the summers in Montana working on my dad's ranch over there.
Montana's so beautiful. I went there this past year during COVID. Took like a 3-month a month-long road trip, maybe a month and a half actually. Yeah, hit Montana and a bunch of places. I loved it. It's really beautiful.
Big sky country, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
absolutely. Sure. So split my time growing up between those two places, and then moved to Phoenix to go to Arizona State University, and then was there for quite a long time before moving to San Francisco, and then moving back to Phoenix. And this is kind of actually what spurred on the idea for LocalBuzz, was that it was such a painful experience. Surprisingly, when I moved back to Phoenix, I thought, hey, I'll be able to pick up where I left off, and boy, was I wrong.
The friends that you had, or maybe are in different places doing different things, stuff like that?
Absolutely. And I was in a different stage of life, right? So we have different kids. We have kids. Mm-hmm. I had at that time a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and whoa, man, talking about a handful, right? You're constantly looking for things for the kids to do, or else they're going to drive you up the wall.
Yeah.
So we were faced with that challenge. And like I said, I had the expectation that we would be able to pick up, but we were gone for 5 years, and so much of the city had changed, and we were in a different stage, and we moved to a different part of the city. And so it was a really big challenge to really get acquainted with what's going on. Even with Yelp and Google, and at that time we had Nextdoor. None of that was really helpful.
Nextdoor is not really for finding things to do. It's about like, hey, like somebody's dog's loose on I-35, or
exactly.
someone stole a package yesterday. Like, watch out.
Yeah, no, exactly, right. So it's meant to be more of a message board between you and your neighbors, and like you said, hey, this is what's happening on kind of like the street level, but you don't get a really sense of like what else is going on in the community.
No, you're right. I like it. I like the idea because everything's really fractured, right? So like if I want to find maybe like what concerts are happening, I'll check one side. If I want to find like if there's things at a park, I don't even really know where I'd go to find that. Like Yelp is what I use to like get bids on my sprinkler system's broken, right?
Yes.
So I mean, or like check the reviews for a restaurant right before, but there's no like syndicated way that is cleanly built with a good user interface and a good experience to put all these things that are interesting into one thing. So yeah, I mean, definitely I see that like there's a space for it.
Yeah. And so I'm a web developer myself, right? And I kind of like specialize in really on the UI side of things, building interfaces and web applications. And so when I started working on LocalBuzz, I came from the standpoint of like not originally just coming up with a solution, but really thinking about what is the nuance of this problem that we're trying to solve, right? And what's going on with the current landscape. And so what I learned is that a lot of the way that the internet is structured is really along the lines of two approaches. One is kind of search using keyword terms on Google. And then the other option is to be able to look at reviews and ratings, right? Well, for one thing, keyword search is not a great way for local discovery. You have to put a lot of thought into it. And so a lot of times when we're looking for something to do, we already know what we've done in the past, but we don't know something new, right?
Yeah, it's true.
And to be able to like force you to use a keyword search to search for something new, to me is just ludicrous, right?
And it's something you wouldn't even have thought of anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And then the second part is just that everything is text-based, which takes a lot of time to process.
Mm-hmm.
You could spend hours researching, and at the end of it, it's just such an exhausting process. And you're just like, you know what? I'm just going to stay home, watch
Netflix and chill.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And you're just like, you know what? I can't, I don't have energy to do anything else. Yeah. And then with Yelp and then the ratings and reviews, they're static too. They're about places and they're like historical information. They're not about what's happening now.
That's true. That's true. So when you started in Phoenix, well, first off, so your background is in web application development and user interface.
Yeah.
So is this your first business?
Yeah. I mean, this is my first foray. Well, I've worked on a previous startup on my own, and that like didn't go out.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
So
you've made other attempts. So you had a past attempt, didn't work out.
Correct. Yeah.
When did you start doing entrepreneurship? I'm always interested to know why people do entrepreneurship and when they do entrepreneurship and at what stage of their life are in, how much money they had at the time. Not that I'm going to ask the exact, but like some people are like, I had no money. Some people are like,
yeah,
I had $100,000. I spent all of it. Like, so what made you make the jump to entrepreneurship, and at what risk level was that?
I've always been tinkering in my mind. Mm-hmm. I'm that type of person where I see a problem, I'm like, gosh, I can't ignore that problem. I got to deal with it, right? And so with the first attempt at my startup, what I did, so let's back up a little. Sorry. Okay. So I'm always tinkering. And then when I moved to San Francisco, I got ingrained with kind of the startup culture where you have to be, right?
The surf culture? The startup culture?
Yeah, the startup.
Okay,
yeah,
I thought you said surf for a second.
Oh, sorry.
Like, either one of those are cool.
Yeah, the startup culture. I started working with a digital agency there. That was my first kind of like foray into kind of the tech scene.
Well, I assumed you had moved to San Francisco for the startup culture. Is that not the case?
No, it was just simply to get out of Phoenix.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it just so happened like it was a good a match between my technical background as well.
What was the wrong with Phoenix? Well, funny thing, when I grew up in Indiana, I was dead set on moving to Arizona. For some reason, I had this in my mind. I was like, I'm going to move to Arizona just because I was looking at the best weather in the United States. And and then I got into like programming, and then I was like, okay, I'll move to San Francisco. Then I researched San Francisco, and this was around 2012. And I was like, oh my God, I mean, it's way worse now. But at that time, even then, it was the prices were so bad. Yeah. I heard it was so crowded. I knew all the VC money and all the benefit of being around people that are like dead set on like starting a company. Maybe I should have gone, but then I had a coworker that lived in Austin. It was a remote company. The company was based in California. Mm-hmm. He already lived here. He actually lived in Round Rock, and he was like, Austin's really good. You should, if you don't like the prices in San Francisco, you should check this out as an alternative. It's not San Francisco, but I'm so glad I chose here. At least I think I am. I don't know what would have happened if I moved there, because now everyone over there, not everyone, but a lot of people are moving here.
Yes, exactly.
So, I'm like, well, I already made the move. So
yeah.
But going back to what you're saying about Phoenix, you wanted to get out of Phoenix, and it wasn't really because of the startup culture. It was just because it matched your skill set.
It's just that I moved to Phoenix to go to ASU, and I ended up living in Phoenix. I wasn't expecting to live in Phoenix for that long. I was actually, when I graduated, I was like, oh, look, I'll find a job in another city. But I was of that mindset at that time where, like you need to have a job lined up before you actually move to the city. Well, it just turned out that all the jobs that I lined up was always in Phoenix. So I had lived in Phoenix for a long time, and we finally got to a certain part where, like, again, life was starting to get monotonous. We weren't finding new things to do because it was very difficult to find new things to do, right? So we were going to, like, the weekends are spent at Costco and all that, right? I just finally got fed up of that. And so we're like, why not try San Francisco? Mm-hmm. So we saved up for like 6 months. But make sure we budgeted for 6 months. And we're like, if it doesn't work out, we can always move
and
back to
And this is when you
Phoenix.
had the kids by now or not?
No, we didn't have kids at that time.
Okay, no kids yet?
Yeah, no kids then. Mm-hmm. So we moved out there and I was able to land a job like within 3 weeks of just because I come from a tech background.
Yeah,
it was a great match over there.
You're hired.
Yeah, it was really great.
You're hired at an insane salary.
Yeah.
Also, your apartment's $3,000 a month. Deal with it.
Well, it all evens out, right? Yes, you're making a lot more money,
but
relative to the rest of the country, but the cost of living is just really, really high over there in every regard. Like not only the rent, but the food and everything.
Well, I'll sidetrack us for a second, then we'll circle back to this about like the whole. They're calling it the Great Reshuffle. When I watched some documentary about like the COVID and everyone working from home. I don't remember the statistic, but I think it was something around like the U.S. predicted that 30% of the U.S. workforce could work from home based on technology if the companies allowed them. And I could be wrong on the number, but whatever number it was, we like almost hit that during the pandemic.
Oh yeah.
And then it's gone down a little bit, but there's going to be. I talk to my friends all the time because I have friends that are obviously still they work for companies, startups downtown, and
correct, yeah.
And I'm like, so what are you going to do? You're going to go back to the office, like? And I'm like, dude, you should stand your ground. Also, you should just start a coup. Just like get on the chat and be like, hey, like we're not going back to the office. Let's all like say we're not going back to the office because they can only because I think to me a company is. Talent should be the number one priority. Whether or not they're in your office should not be your number one priority. And what's going to happen when these people try to go back to the office is they're going to lose their best people because their best people can work kind of wherever they want because they know they can.
Yeah.
And then so it's like now all the remote people are going to get the best talent and then they can be the better companies. I don't know. I think the whole the culture thing that people push in startups, maybe I'm wrong, but I find it annoying. They're like, yeah, let's have catered food. Let's do all this stuff. And it's like, I don't care about your cult. Like, if you have a cool project for me to work on and you give me a lot of autonomy, I'm happy. I don't care that you're going to cater my lunches. I don't want to go to your office either. You know what I mean? So
absolutely.
So I don't know just what's going to happen with that. And also, so San Francisco, I heard a lot of the companies there, they're allowing their employees to go to remote, but they're going to change the salary based on the living expenses of the location they're at, which I think is smart. That's what they should do.
Correct, yeah.
That saves them money and it helps the people that work there have more freedom and live where they want to live, you know? And I would take a pay cut if I moved to Montana from San Francisco because my living expenses are going to be really low.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What really gets me is kind of the, like you said, the startup culture there where everybody has to be in place. And I understand the value of having people in place, but I felt it was like overbearing. And to me, it was really surprising that when it comes to the whole startup scene, right? And the reason why startups are making such a big difference is because it's about, really bringing about innovations into different areas, right? And really like disrupting things, right? But for the longest time, even when I was living in the Bay Area, I felt that they weren't essentially eating their dog food, right? They're talking about, let's bring about innovation, all that stuff. But when it came to like work culture, they were like still very, very, in my opinion, kind of like backwards minded. They weren't embracing technologies. And it took something like the pandemic to really raise, bring people's attention like, hey, look, there's actually an opportunity here where we can leverage technology and we still can be a pretty productive workforce. And this is like a great example of that people are like moving, working remotely and we're still pretty productive. But the other really great side effect of that is that now we have a really great work-life balance, right? And as a result of that, when we come and dedicate our time towards work, in my opinion, we're actually a lot more focused and a lot more productive because now we have something to look forward to versus a 1.5 hour commute each way.
Yeah. And it's this idea of, it's like founders, they have a dream and they have a vision and it's very important to them. It's their life, right?
Yeah.
You can't expect that your employees to have that same focus on your vision because it's not theirs. And at the end of the day, like they're not going to make millions of dollars if it pulls off unless they're like an early employee of a company that ends up IPOing. Sure, then they'll make a lot of money, but it's like Yeah, I don't think people should expect their employees to care about their vision as much as the founder. That's just unreasonable.
It's really tough for sure. Yeah.
I think it's like, as long as they do good work and, I think companies basically try to turn it into this thing where it's like your life should be consumed by this company and what we're doing. When really, I think it should be like, you should be good at what you do and you should come in here and do your job and then you should leave and whatever.
Well, so like the way I think about this too is that even during your off times, you're actually processing things behind the scenes in your mind. So like when you come back to work, hey, you might already have a great idea. A lot of the roadblocks that I'm able to overcome are during the periods where I have distraction.
Just on a walk, I've solved a lot of problems when I'm stuck in my computer, stuck against a wall or whatever. And then it's just like, you just go on a walk and you stop thinking about it. But then like all of a sudden you're like, that I could do it like this. And then you go back and you're like,
absolutely.
Oh, that worked.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I've been involved in managing work remote teams, even when I was in the Bay Area for quite some time. And so through those experiences, I learned what works out and what doesn't work out. But overall, I was able to see that, hey, this was actually something that was very, very doable.
Mm-hmm. So what did you think of San Francisco in general? I mean, how long did you live there?
So I was there from 2008 to 2013. San Francisco and the Bay Area, it's very much ingrained into the whole startup culture. And so really when you meet people, and if you're into the startup scene, there's great opportunities to be able to bounce off ideas and build relationships over there.
Probably builds a lot of motivation in yourself too, because you're the average of the people that you hang out with the most. That's saying.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But again, the cost of living was just a little too much, and our family dynamics had changed, and so it forced us to kind of rethink things and see, what are some possible options. And then for us, Phoenix just turned out to be that way. So after we moved from San Francisco to Phoenix, up until actually end of February, the last week of February, I was traveling back to San Francisco probably 2 times a week. 2 times a month. So I was going back and forth there, and it's only an hour and a half flight. So a lot of times when I would fly in, I would get to the office a lot sooner than the people that are working there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's funny.
Yeah. And so that actually worked out really well. And to me, it just proves that you can really work from any place.
Yeah. So let's get back to the path of LocalBuzz. I was asking you about kind of like your move from Phoenix to San Francisco. Well, then you went back to Phoenix from San Francisco. You found it hard to find things to do. And so how did you go about okay, you got the idea for LocalBuzz, right? So then what? Like you're starting at zero, you have an idea, then what?
Yeah. So there was a precursor to LocalBuzz. So I had this idea of what's a good way to be able to bring people back, on the community level. And so the original idea for the previous startup was to be able to do it around group text messaging. So, right now when you do group text messaging, you invite people to group, right? Well, what happens is that you're constrained by the group in 2 ways. One is by the members of the group. Now it's a little more forgiving, but back then when I was working on this idea, is that's it. You invite your 5 friends, and only your 5 friends could be involved in that conversation. And your conversations were all over the place. Now, if it was 5 friends, you could keep that conversation on point. But when you have 35 friends, oh my gosh, it just goes all over the place. And then once you want to leave, you can't leave those type of things.
You can't leave this group. That's right? Annoying.
Yeah, especially on that SMS one, man. Oh, it is can you stop this and start a new group? It'll go dead for a little bit, and then somebody forgets about it, and then all of a sudden you're on this group nightmare chat thing. So I decided to create a startup around topics of conversation. So you would start a topic by sharing some information or ask a question about things, and you invite people to it, and people can come and go. So it does 2 things. One, it frees things up where now people can join and leave the conversation, and they can invite other people to the conversation. So now you're talking about having these nth degrees of social connections, kind of like the game of Kevin Bacon type of thing, right?
I don't know that.
Oh, really? Okay. No. So Kevin Bacon was like in so many movies that he was connected to somebody in like within 6 or 7 degrees.
Okay.
So I want to be able to show those type of relationships. So like, oh yeah, you might not know this one person, but you're connected to this other person in the conversation through this, and you could see all the social connections through that. So I thought that was really cool to be able to show those social relationships. And then the other aspect of it is being able to keep the conversations on topic. Once the conversation's end, boom, it just stays there, and then you move on to create a new conversation as well. Mm-hmm. The problem with that is that on an intimate scale, it's really great, but it's not scalable in the sense of like it growing very, very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up working on that idea for about 10 months. And coming to the realization, I was like, hey, look, this isn't going to be a scalable startup idea where it's going to be fundable.
Was it hard for you to put that idea down?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, so this is something that like I thought, oh, hey, I needed to commit myself completely to this. And so I dropped everything and just focused on the startup idea for 10 months.
How were you able to do that?
So we burned through the savings.
Yeah. Okay.
So we saved up for 10 months. Right? Mm-hmm. I had prior to that, I had saved up. Right. Mm-hmm. And keep in mind, this is like after we moved back to Phoenix. Right. Mm-hmm. And so at that time we had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old.
And your wife?
And my wife.
She was cool with this?
Well, she wasn't working at that time because she was raising our little ones. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, she
she was like, sure, honey, blow through all the savings. Go ahead.
Bless her heart. I mean, she believed in me, right? And she allowed me to do that. And yeah, I remember it was roughly about my birthday in October when I had to give her the news. I was like, hey, look, I'm going to have to wind this thing down. And look for a job because we burned through our savings pretty much. And she's like, oh my gosh. I mean, you can imagine how heartbreaking it, like, for her, it's about security in the sense of, can you provide to be able to support your family, right?
Yeah, and eventually retire and everything else.
It's very, I mean, for her, it's just that immediate need. Like, what are we going to do for the next few months? How are we going to recover and get back to like, because we're like, we can severely like constrained our financial situation to, be able to fund the operations. And now like, oh, we're virtually have zero savings left, So I had to get back to work. But I was always tinkering. Like, so it forced me to reevaluate what I was doing. What's the overarching goal? Again, it was like bringing people back to their community. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, okay, well, we want to get connected to our local community. And that was the biggest pain point. What can we do to help people achieve that goal, to help us achieve that goal? And this is how the idea for LocalBuzz came about, because I was looking at other platforms like Instagram and I was like, wow, this is really great. And I started seeing content on there about people sharing things about, hey, there's this great restaurant, they're serving this meal. I was like, wow, that's really great. And so that's what spurred on the idea for LocalBuzz, is be able to use pictures to tell the story versus describing it.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back and I want to ask you, because I've always thought about being in a situation where you're an entrepreneur and you have an idea and it doesn't work out, then you have to go back to working a 9-to-5. And I say that kind of in a negative way, like have to go back to working a 9-to-5. But like for me, it would be negative. Like I would only be getting the job because I wanted the money, and not knowing that I would just save the money again just to spend it again on something else. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I've always thought like that could happen to me. And I'm just wondering how bad it would suck. How did it feel to like go back to work? Was it like, were you engaged at work or were you not engaged at work?
No. So, yeah, let me back up. So prior to working on that first startup, I'd say about, I don't know, a few years before that, I actually made the leap from being a full-time employee to actually being a contractor / technology consultant. And I decided to take that leap because what I was facing was just not being able to achieve my project objectives because a lot of office politics came into place. And there was like things that sometimes were just out of, like, for me, a lot of times things were just out of my control. And they're like, hey, look, this is your role in your full-time job to do this. And we don't want you to be involved in anything else. So even though I felt that I had a lot to contribute outside of my technical capabilities, that the company did not value that. And so it came to a point where like it became a really distraction for both of us. And I was like, hey, look, I need to step out of this. And I was like, hey, why not give it a try? And so it was a big leap of faith to jump into doing contracting. And so,
well, that gives you contracting gives you the freedom and flexibility of like having as many vacation days as you want. You work when you want, for the most part.
Well, yeah. And so what I love about contracting, is that you're brought on to work on a very specific project. And so there's a very specific timeline for that. You have your starting date and your end date, or like when you complete your project. Whereas like full time is like, it's just whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot more focused when you're working on a project, very specifically for a project. And at that time, when you're doing so, again, referring back to my role as full-time, where like, hey, you're just making technical contributions. But when you're working on a project as a contractor or a consultant, now all of a sudden they value you for your ideas that you can do to help improve the project, whether it's like, some of the project management capabilities, or like how you're defining requirements, team structure, and then how you're just running the project overall. All of a sudden now, every project that I work on, and I leverage that as like valuable skills and experience that I'm learning on the next project. And so when I go and they're evaluating me for, the next assignment for me, and they're evaluating me, they have all this reference of all these projects that I've been involved with. So this is what I love about doing the contracting and consulting thing, because one, it provides the flexibility, like you said. Secondly, it provides all this invaluable experience that you really don't get as a full-time employee.
That makes sense. And that's kind of why they're bringing on a contractor, right? They want your expertise for this. And then your expertise should be polished from having done all these other specific projects. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, jumping into now the startup thing, which by the way, like I just recently did full-time. So now I'm working on LocalBuzz full-time. But it got to, because I had to rebuild my savings, right?
Yeah.
So I wrapped up my last engagement at the end of March, and so I've been working on LocalBuzz since the beginning of April. And we have to get back to it. Then I'll jump into the consulting thing again.
I want to ask you. So you started in April. The pandemic was still going on pretty well then, right? And
well, things are starting to open up. Yeah.
Did you start this right before the pandemic started?
No. So I mean, LocalBuzz. So LocalBuzz is something that actually it's something that I've been working on since 2017.
Okay, cool. So it's not like you just started it.
No. Yeah, no. Mm-hmm. We've been working at this, and again, with the first startup, it was a very painful learning experience. Right? You can't just like jump in full feet and with the leap of faith, right? And like, hey, this is going to work out, because if it doesn't work out financially, it's going to ruin you, right? And so I had to figure out, hey, what's the smarter way in which I can work on this idea? And more importantly, it's really about validating your idea, right? And not from the standpoint of like, oh, here, you give out some surveys or something like that. You have to do some real world validation, because it's one thing for somebody to say, oh yeah, that's really cool, and do it. But it's another thing to actually get them to do that, right?
Absolutely.
On a regular basis.
Yeah, you're totally right about that. And that's something that I feel like it's come up more lately. More people are talking about idea validation. I don't know how long that's been going on, but like, it makes a lot of sense. People saying things like, well, I don't know, first just start with an Excel spreadsheet, like, and get some contacts, and then have like people always say the shitty MVP thing. And I've always kind of ignored that, because that sounds so silly to me, but it's like, I guess like a really basic version is fine to validate it, because like, if the idea is good enough, you will be able to tell if you could like, all right, now if we put more money into this and we have a better product, if only X people, well, if we got X people with this, imagine if we do this, then we'll get this many people, instead of just being like, I know it's a good idea. It scratches a niche that I have. And then But a lot of other things came into play, come into like scalability.
Correct.
How many people really have the problem? How expensive is it to scale up the solution to the problem? Everything else, you know. So yeah, just kind of like having some numbers, which are going to be probably mostly bullshit, but at least an idea of like what it could cost and what kind of problems you might run into, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can only go so far that you can, you know, within your means, right? And you can't really extend beyond that, because if you do, you're really shooting yourself in the foot, in my opinion, because you're kind of like just BSing yourself and you're BSing somebody else. And then eventually you'll reach a stopping point and you go like, it's not going to go any further, right? And so, you know, the key, again, is through validation, right? In real world validation. How can you do that as cheaply and as quickly as possible? And so with LocalBuzz, again, the painful lesson I learned is like, don't build it and wait for them to come, but to do early validation as quickly as possible. And so when I started working on LocalBuzz, the first thing we did was like set up WordPress, and I bought a WordPress theme, and then I lightly customized a WordPress theme, and then put it out there and start growing the community. And that took a long time to do that validation process to grow the community. It took 2.5 years, you know? And at the same time, like I learned that you'll have to be patient in certain regards, because sometimes market conditions aren't right. So imagine 2017, if I was trying to go to market in a big scale way, it would have been way too early. Instagram was just like starting to like, you know, get really, really popular. And the whole notion of like the social media influencer culture was something that was really, really new as well, right? If you talk to a lot of mainstream people, they're like, man, I don't know what you mean about that. Nowadays, that's all I hear about is social media influencer culture. So if we were trying to like scale up LocalBuzz and raise up a ton of money, I think it would have flared out because people wouldn't get it. You know, now we're riding on the coattails of everything that exists, but we layer in the context of like, hey, people really want to get back into communities, because as a result of the pandemic, right? The pandemics really showed how important local communities are in our lives. And when something like that completely disrupts us and shows how much chaos it causes, it really heightens the awareness of like, hey, you know, we need to get back to our roots. And so again, if I like launched before then, it would just flared up and you wouldn't, you know. So now I'm able to write on the coattails of all these things that are happening. So there's a certain element of luck as well as timing of things. And again, just validating and pushing as hard as you can, but not overextending.
Yeah, I feel like you really got to push things down people's throat, right? Because it's like, especially when you're trying something new or to get a new product out, because like you'll text some people and they'll be like, yeah, I'll check it out. Like, and maybe they won't, maybe they will, maybe they'll log in and never log in again. But it's kind of like consistently reminding people and getting, because if you have a platform and a community isn't valuable until the community's there, right? I mean, So it's kind of like a chicken and an egg problem.
Exactly.
So then you got to really push to build a community from nothing until it's valuable enough for a new person to be like, oh, there's already a community here.
Well, the thing is that there are people exist. So it's a matter of just really finding them, really, right? There's this bell curve. This is called the product adoption or product life cycle bell curve that you go through, and it's split up into 4 quadrants. So you have like the first one are your alpha testers, which is essentially you and your team that's testing the product. And then the next one is your early adopters. But each of these has each of those audience has a different type of characteristic, right? So what we're focused on right now is really the early adopters, because we just don't have a platform that's really geared towards mainstream. It doesn't have all the features and functionalities and slick UI. And so we're really focused on kind of like the early adopters that, you know, have this pain point where they want to be part of the local community just as much as I want to be, right? And they feel like nothing's able to solve the problem except for LocalBuzz. And so they're really active on that platform. And so it's like finding a handful of those people, and they become the seeds for growing your community on the platform. But in the beginning, it's a slow process. Alexis Ohanahan, the co-founder of Reddit, was talking about this a couple months ago, and he's just like, hey, look, you know, people think that it just simply explodes, you know, when you build like a social media platform, and it doesn't. You know, it's an exponential growth from the standpoint of like towards the end there where you get the hockey stick effect. But in the beginning, man, it's an all out effort to grow the community, to raise awareness and really find those early adopters, because they're the ones, they're going to be active and they're going to ones that are going to be the advocates for your platform.
Okay. I want to ask you how you're finding those early adopters, but I'm going to grab another drink. Are you're guys?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a lot of work. That's why I'm out here in Austin, because we're growing we're working on growing the Austin community. Right. And so, I'm just coming out here and going out there and building relationships and connections with as many people as possible.
And so, well, how do you go about that? Like, let's say, I mean, what do you do?
Fortunately, we have all these different technology platforms that we can, leverage, right? So right now we're using Instagram a lot. Because you can find, you just type in Austin, you can see who's posting what type of content.
You're targeting influencers and getting them on.
We're targeting influencers, but also local businesses. That some local businesses are on Instagram as well, right?
A lot of them are, yeah. The ones that are smart.
Correct. Yeah. The ones that are like, okay, we need to be, because this is where it's going. So we're finding a lot of people that way, and then same thing with Facebook. So we're finding and connecting with a lot of people on Facebook as well. So we're leveraging all those, but also just coming out here and meeting and having networking, right? So, I met you through Sam, who made the introduction, right? And it's about relationship building at the end.
True. I mean, that's what all sales is, relationships, right?
Absolutely.
And it's weird because it's like with platforms, it's interesting because you're not selling them something. They don't have to buy anything. They're just trying to get them to use something and to realize that they like it, right?
Yeah.
So what are some other things? What are some other challenges? I mean, that you have in kind of getting adoption? Yeah,
I mean, one of it is is getting people to have LocalBuzz be top of mind, right? Because we're essentially building from something that's zero, that doesn't exist, in terms of creating a new behavior for users to go from 0 to 1, essentially, right?
Yeah.
That's a big challenge. Now, when we're going out there and we're meeting people, they love the concept for LocalBuzz, right? And they're down on LocalBuzz, but we have to go and be above and beyond that, right? And keep on letting them know and raising awareness. Hey, there's new content. Come check out what's happening on LocalBuzz, or be active on LocalBuzz. Share with something that you're doing. So we're constantly in contact with the people that are on LocalBuzz. Not only through the LocalBuzz platform, but which other means that we have a communication channel with them. So whether it's on Instagram or Facebook or just straight calling or texting them. So it's about building. Again, it's all about relationship building in the beginning, because you want those people to be the seeds for creating the great community. You can't simply just go out there and do like mass marketing, because what will happen is that you'll get a mass blip, and then all of a sudden it'll drop off immediately, right? And nobody wants that. It's a bad experience. Investors don't want that.
You're putting down the steel in the concrete, as they would say, right?
Yes.
Steel in the concrete.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the toughest work. But I love it, because I'm going out there and I'm meeting so many cool people like you. It's truly remarkable. And again, I want to know about what's happening in local communities. And for me to be able to have this opportunity to go out there and discover these things and be able to share them, meet all these great people, it really greatly enriches my life. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like a lot of fun for sure. I mean, you get to work on your product, talk about your idea, meet new people. So what do you have, like brand ambassadors, anybody else helping you with this outreach? Or are you doing a lot of that outreach yourself?
So we do have, it's very informal right now. Just because we're a young, scrappy startup. We don't have a big marketing budget.
Mm-hmm.
I just gave you a sticker, right?
Yeah.
And we have some stickers and shirts, and that's really like the extent of it. We don't have like, a big marketing budget for like Facebook ads and stuff like that. And, they're actually not good use of our money, right? And so we have a local team, and then we try to extend and be able to have people that are kind of like ambassadors, be able to build relationships with other people and help us network as well. But
do you incentivize?
But no, I mean, not right now. We want to. We're just not we're not in that position to incentivize. So we're actually in the process of fundraising right now.
Okay. Yeah. So how are you going about the fundraising? Like, because I'm starting to look into this myself. So like, I mean, your early stage startup, right? So are you trying to get like your seed round? Like, are you looking to?
So the whole concept of pre-seed is just all over the place nowadays. It really is, because like you say, hey, I'm pre-seed, and some people are like, oh, is that like 100,000? Or you could talk to another person. Oh, are you 1 million?
That's
a big swing. You know, you're just like, wait, that's a 900. You know, and in fact, like, so right now we're raising roughly about 1 million.
Okay, because I talked to another guy and I asked him, it's Josh Fabian. He was on the podcast. Is a company, Matify, which is like a company that helps video game coaches connect players, and so the coaches make money. Yeah, they raised 8 million so far, and I was asking him like, well, what's the seed round? He's like, I'm like, it's like 200,000. He's like, dude, it could be $1 million these days. Like a seed round could be $1 million.
I was just talking to one person. And he's like, I think you should be raising 500,000. And then I was just talking to another person who's a VC person, and she's like, look, you should be raising at least $2 million.
Well, I've heard the advice: raise as much as you can, right? As long as you don't like let that mess up your strategy and waste it. But like,
this is the kind of the first like institutional round or outside investor round. We raised our previous round, our friends and family round. We raised roughly about 150 mil. No, not
150 million.
I mean, 100. 150,000. And we raised it during the pandemic.
Yeah.
We raised it actually from small business owners. You know, we were prior to the pandemic, we were talking to angel investors, and you know, the conversations were progressing, and then pandemic hit, and they're like, "Sorry, we got to lock down right now." And we're like, "Oh my gosh!" So we had to scramble. And my co-founder is a small business owner himself, and so he's the one that made all these introductions. And originally, we're talking with them to get them on the LocalBuzz platform, right? And like, hey, would you mind start using it? Because we want to demonstrate to investors that businesses are using our platform. But then it led to like, hey, would you be interested in investing in LocalBuzz? And they're like, yeah, sure, because I see the value in what your platform does.
Gotcha.
And so we raised like 85 to 90% of our fundraise through local businesses. So it's very heartening to be able to be in a position to do that, you know?
Yeah, that's great. So how would you make money on it? So what's your revenue going to be based on? So,
I'm going to have to describe it at a very, very high level because we don't actually have a revenue platform in place right now. And things are kind of in flux. But overall, our monetization strategy is based on helping local businesses build relationships with the local consumers or local audience, I should say. And so that's done in kind of like two forms. Initially, there's a third component which I'll talk about as well. But so, you know, one part of it is being a social media platform, advertising revenue, right? So it's giving businesses an opportunity to be able to get in front of the local audience and be able to post content that way. We don't plan on monetizing until we build up a very substantial audience, right? Yeah. Because you got to have eyeballs there.
Yeah.
And then the second component of that is like, okay, once that audience becomes their customer through a LocalBuzz platform, through the content, is actually bring them into their business and them becoming their customer, right? That's a brand new customer. How do we convert that to being a one-time experience to be a repeated experience so that becomes a long lifetime customer for that business? So we want to be able to build the tooling that supports that as well, to build a long-term relationship between the business and that customer, and start understanding what are the interests and needs of that customer, so you can start tailoring the communication and the offerings to that customer.
Gotcha.
You know, like be able to create a rewards program, for instance.
Hey, everyone. This is your host, Justin. I just wanted to thank everyone for listening and give those that are new to the podcast a reminder to please subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast player. If you're on YouTube, please like the video, share it with a friend. That helps us out. Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. I like it. So another question, and before, we're almost out of time, but I want to ask you. So I've been told, when I talked to Josh, the same guy I mentioned earlier, he said that a lot of early stage fundraising is based on who you know.
Yes.
Are you finding that to be true? And
yes.
How are you tackling that?
Oh my gosh, yes. It's really about relationship building and who you know, and being a first time founder that doesn't have a lot of relationships. It just takes time right now. That's what I'm learning. And so the way I'm going about it is really primarily on two platforms. One is Clubhouse. So I don't know if you're on Clubhouse.
I am. I kind of hate Clubhouse.
It takes a lot of time. I've been on Clubhouse since about January. And so that's one platform. And then the other one's on Twitter. The investment community is very active on Twitter. You know, especially you're talking about VC partners. When you're at that stage, and if you don't have relationships, warm introductions, like I have a very limited network in that regard. And so Twitter provides the opportunity for you to start building a relationship with them through, their tweets and being able to see if there's something that they're tweeting about that might be pertinent to what you're working on. You can kind of inject by replying to that tweet, right? Mm-hmm. Or you can post something and refer them to it. So that's one way of building relationship, and that's what I'm learning. Mm-hmm. You can't simply just go out there and like blast away cold emails because they get so much inbound. So there's a lot of deal flow happening, and there's a lot of investors, and there's a lot of money in the space, and there's a lot of startups. The problem is that there's such a big log jam right now. So investors, what I'm hearing, the investors are getting hundreds of emails, literally hundreds of emails every day. Jeez. Imagine going through hundreds of emails within the course of 16 hours, let's say 16 hours.
Yeah.
You just don't have, yeah, exactly. So you can imagine, right?
Yeah.
I see like there's got to be a better way to doing something where we can do this matchmaking. Because like right now it's highly inefficient, and which is crazy. Again, when we're talking about the startup space, it's all about innovation, but there's no innovation in that area at all.
It almost makes me feel like I should just build something and say, fuck the investment, and just be like, if I can't build it without it, then fuck it. Like, you know what I mean? But there's certain businesses where that wouldn't apply, but I feel like obviously if you're building a brick and mortar business, but I feel like even with what you're doing, you could probably get to a decent place, right? With a lot of legwork.
Yeah.
To the point where they're going to be coming to you. You know what I mean?
Well, again, it's all about validation, right? And so the more that you validate, it's really about de-risking that idea from that standpoint. So like they want to finally, put the money in when it's really a sure bet. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, you're making money. You're making $40,000 a month. And then all you have to do is just add money to this, and you just replicate or be able to scale up that platform. They want to put fuel
on an existing fire is the term that I've heard. Exactly. Yeah. They want to pour gasoline on a fire that's already burning. But at that point, I'd be like, no, like stay away from my fire. Like I'm keeping all of it.
No, yeah. So, that's the biggest challenge. And so, you really want to bootstrap as long as possible. And again, it's really about market validation on your thing. And if you're a technical person and you can go beyond just building really the bare bones to start building a full-fledged scalable platform, you have the ability, that puts you in such a better position in so many regards, right? Because it puts you in a position to start monetizing. Now you're growing it. And so now you're dependent on income coming in from revenue that's being generated. You don't have to rely on investors. And you become self-sufficient, then you own 100% of that company. Mm-hmm. Now that puts you even in a stronger position, because now investors really want to be part of that. Mm-hmm. And so they're going to like raise your valuation in your company even faster.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So money makes money type of thing.
For sure. So we're almost out of time. This was great. I learned a lot talking to you. Is there anything else you want to say? I mean, obviously people check out LocalBuzz. If they just open the App Store on their iPhone and they look at LocalBuzz, can they get into it?
Yeah. So we're available both on Android as well as iPhone. And you can even go to our site, localbuzz.co. And there's a link there on the top navigation area. And from that link, you can select the Austin community. One thing that I want to note is that even though we're a social media platform, we're not like your conventional social media platform where you first have to sign up, right? Create an account to see what's happening. We're coming about this from a standpoint of like, hey, we're an open community-based social media platform. So you can go to our LocalBuzz site and you can see what's happening in Austin. But it's an even cooler experience to be able to download the app and simply just like scroll up through the videos, where you have to, like on the website, you have to click on each of the individual tiles. It's a really great, cool experience. I'm discovering so much of Austin and like in the Phoenix area. And again, we just want to be able to let people know, hey, there's so much more to our communities and the Austin communities that people realize, and help them really help them quickly come up to speed with what their community is about.
Cool. Adrian, this is great. Thank you so much for coming in. Appreciated it. And I like the idea. Wish you all the best of luck. I'll post a video on LocalBuzz. I'll sign up when I'm at the pool.
Oh, that's awesome. Hey, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah.